Approaching Felonias Park, a novel by Catherine Mercurio Gotthard. Narration and music by Michael F. Mercurio. Approaching Felonias Park, Chapter 1. Hello, my name is Jezebel. I process high-interest loans for the desperate. That's how Jezebel McPherson would have described herself. She would say it in an even, ironic voice, and nod patiently, as if the listener understood. But she was feeling neither ironic nor patient this morning. She was feeling lecherous. In an act of perversion, Jezebel's mother had chosen her daughter's name. Jezebel meant the Lord, Baal, exists. And for whatever reason, Jezebel's Bible-smart mother thought it a good joke to name her daughter after a pagan sentiment. But Jezebel's mother also liked the image of the Old Testament figure. Though Jezebel had become loosely associated with prostitution and evil, Mom thought more of Jezebel's royal rank and how the woman represented a powerful figure behind the throne. While she maintained a perhaps unhealthy sense of guilt, Jezebel never felt completely evil, nor did she feel powerful, even though she was the giver of money, the loan maker. And she knew she had only a few more moments before the next beggar would be at her office door. This was the third day Charles had called in sick. Ridiculous, she thought. She might have had more sympathy if he had claimed to have, say, strep throat or something serious. Or even something interesting like, "Hi, I ate a steak from a moo-moo with mad cow disease. I'm recovering nicely, but need at least an extra day." She could picture Charles saying that. She couldn't imagine herself coming up with anything so amusing or creative. But no, she ruminated irritably. He left the message on her voicemail saying he had a virus and probably would not be in for the next 3 days. Jezebel wondered, could he predict how long he would be throwing up or sitting on the toilet? Could he foretell how long a virus would live in his body? Or is this some kind of scientific guess on his part, which she found equally annoying because neither of them were scientists? In fact, the more she worked here, the more she realized how absolutely unscientific this process was, how pointless, how mindless. How long had she had this horrible job? 5 years? 6? 7? She had lost count, and actually, she didn't want to count. Labeling the time with a number would make it worse. Besides, no one could count to infinity. It's not that she really hated what she did. Well, actually, yes, she really was hating what she was doing. She wanted a change, but she felt more stuck than a nail in a petrified tree. How could she change fields now, especially when she had been working in a strange niche for so long, and didn't have the education to break out of the odd prison of pseudo-lending and accounting? Jezebel hung up her jacket on the wall-mounted hook beside her desk. She stashed her tan vinyl purse in the file drawer, and logged back onto her computer. She flicked her long, straight, blonde hair over her thin shoulder, and wondered why she hadn't put it up in her usual ponytail. Maybe, though, she should consider wearing her hair in a bun. Would she feel more respectable then? Her computer system came up. On her wallpaper, she and Michael held hands and walked in the little park not far from Jezebel's apartment. Jezebel loved that picture. The sky smiled in clouds. Michael's brown eyes and grin looked mischievously puppy-like. He didn't have his beard then, and she could read his expression. Her fair hair and complexion contrasted with his tan face and natural dark waves, just long enough for her to run her fingers through. Her own brown eyes smiled. He looked happy, and so did she. It was bright autumn in the photo, and the trees held those glorious colors that said it would be at least a few more weeks before winter set in for real. Jezebel wished herself back to that day. Michael. Jessup Michael Pastor. He insisted on being called Michael, which Jezebel could completely understand. It was one thing they had in common: dislike of their first names. If Jezebel had a middle name, she would use hers too. Maybe she should think about Michael's idea seriously this time. What was she so afraid of? Was she worried that his bad habits would make for a bad life? Was she afraid he wouldn't pay the bills or clean the apartment? She had seen his place. It was usually a mess, but then she wasn't some kind of clean freak. Of course, there was Tarika, and Jezebel didn't want to give up her kitty, and Jezebel liked having her things orderly, like she did now. She just wasn't sure. Jezebel knew what it meant to her clients that she was there, but part of her just didn't care. It wasn't that she was cold, she just couldn't really afford to be fussy anymore. She was burnt, she was tired, she was bored, and she didn't like how angry she was feeling as a result. It was cancerous. So here she sat, doodling on the bland calendar that owned most of her desk. She wrote her name. She wrote Charles, then drew a stick figure of a woman slapping the name silly. Charles Oro. He liked his name, but at the moment she wasn't fond of it or him. She would have to take his clients as well as hers, and the lines would be out the door again for the third day. She groaned in her head. 30 or more people a day at her door asking for money, for a loan. At least 30 times she would have to explain the mission of the organization and their responsibility. She mimicked herself saying it now, murmuring, "Remember, in a pinch is not a bank. You are taking out a high-interest loan to be repaid over a 6-month period. You will be responsible for the principal of the loan, monthly interest accrued at 27%, and the initiation fee of $75. If you miss one or more payments, we reserve the right to aggressively collect from you and or the co-signers designated on your application form. Do you have any questions?" This was the part she could say in her sleep, and it was the part that she didn't know how to manage on her resume. How could she describe this on any resume? "Hello, my name is Jezebel. I process high-interest loans for the desperate. How do we manage collections? Well, I don't really get involved in that part of the process. I just take their applications and assess eligibility. Do I know about my company's reputation? I am not sure what you mean by that, sir." This was the part that always got her. Hey, it wasn't her fault the way collections were handled. She had a job to do, and collections were not part of it. Besides, clients were always so happy to get their loans. She wasn't responsible for their future misery. She was making them happy at the moment, right? Tonia stepped through the door and gestured to a woman with black-length, curly red hair and saucer-sized, purple-rimmed glasses. The woman's makeup looked spackled on, her purple lipstick was peeling, and the concealer barely covered the giant pockmarks that looked like leftovers from childhood chickenpox. Jezebel sighed again. Thank God she had been one of the lucky generations to receive the inoculation. She had her problems, but giant pockmarks were not included in them. "This is," Tonia began. Jezebel nodded and smiled the same way she might at a party where she didn't know anyone. Jezebel tried never to pay attention to their names. There were too many of them, and unless they forgot to sign something correctly, in which case they had to come back to see her, Jezebel never saw them more than once anyway. Why waste mental energy memorizing names that meant nothing in the long run? And did she want to think about them having names? Wasn't that like naming a fish? A no-no because when the fish died you would miss it? Social security numbers and filled-out forms were what she looked for. Sure, she couldn't help but remember a name or two if the client went to collections, but it was never a surprise when a loan went to collections. More than half of the clients went that route. So Jezebel busied herself by looking at the woman's polyester parsley print shirt, orange and teal mega print and orange pants, purple boots, the red hair big and sprayed, a lopsided smile. The woman was tall, and when she sat in the chair in front of Jezebel, she looked uncomfortable, like her big feet didn't know where to put themselves. The woman fidgeted and finally handed over her paperwork to Jezebel, who scanned it to make sure all the blanks were filled in. The lady bounced her leg and peered through her big lenses at Jezebel, who read and pointed to a section on the form. "So you're not working right now, is that correct?" Jezebel asked. She had learned to ask this question right off, without hesitation and without apology. "That's right," said the woman. "So how do you plan on paying this loan?" Jezebel asked, again directly. "I get some assistance and do some work under the table," the woman said, equally as directly. Jezebel looked over the paper at the woman. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked. "I fix fans." "Oh," said Jezebel, and moved closer to her computer. "Don't you want to know anything else?" the redhead asked, staring seriously at Jezebel. "Like how many I can fix, and why I haven't fixed any in the last month, and how I afford the parts and what I do?" Jezebel shrugged. It wasn't her business to ask for details about the lady's business. She just wanted to know how the bill would get paid. "See, on trash day I go through the neighborhoods. It's the weirdest thing. You almost always see a fan in the trash. I've been doing this for 10 years now. And you want to know what's even weirder? The lady bounced her leg faster, her face suddenly animated, and makeup cracking even more. Every year, if I go back to the houses that threw out a fan, they have another one at the same house. So you know what that means. Jezebel found herself looking at the lady and wondering. It means the same people buy cheap fans every year. They use them for a season or two, and then they toss them. That's right, just toss them out like junk. The woman frowned, like she couldn't believe the injustice of it all. It's like fans are disposable. But what these people don't know is... Jezebel waited. The woman leaned in closer and lowered her voice to a whisper. Fans can be restored. I see, said Jezebel, who turned back to her computer, mentally slapping herself for being taken in by the story, as if something exciting was going to come of it. So I collect all the fans, and I take some apart to replace the broken parts of the other ones. Then, when people bring me their fans to fix, I have one to sell them, or I have the part to replace theirs. Pretty nice, huh? Yes, sounds like a good kind of business you've got going there, Jezebel said flatly, entering the information into the computer. Yep, I got $10 usually for fixing a fan. It takes me less than an hour, and all my parts are free. And I never have to buy tools because I have Daddy's old tools, and he had a lot of them. The leg was really bouncing now. The lady was kicking the desk, distracting Jezebel, who wished the woman would just shut up and be still. It will be just one more moment, ma'am, and then I'll print up the agreement, Jezebel said. Do you have any questions on the loan? Nope, I know I'll have enough fans to fix in the next month or so because warmer weather is right around the corner. I'll really get busy and make lots of money, enough to pay the taxes on the house and this little loan back. You understand the terms of the agreement and the way the interest works, right? Jezebel asked again. She knew she didn't have to, but she wanted to make sure the lady knew that even if she paid the loan back in a month, she would still owe the interest for longer than just the summer. I understand, the woman said. I just have to get through this month is all. Running out of important things, and I just haven't had the money or the business, and the winter was so cold. Jezebel heard this a lot, especially when winters were harsh. Utility bill for even a small house could rise over $500 a month easily. Jezebel knew all about that because her apartment ate a couple of hundred to heat, and she always tried to keep the temperature at about 68 so she would have some fun money left over. Then sometimes Michael would come through and give her some cash, or he would take them somewhere fun, so she would save money that way too. Michael. Lately, whenever she thought of him, she had the same feeling she got when she looked at milkweeds in the fall, after their fluff had gone to seed and started flying off. But she didn't want to consider that right now, and she sure as heck didn't want to be thinking about fans. She typed a little faster, hit the print button, and told the lady she would be right back. In the lobby, Tonya picked up one phone line after another. 6 or 7 people sat in the cracking plastic orange seats by the storefront window, and another 3 or 4 people vied for parking spaces out front. This was freaking ridiculous, Jezebel thought. She couldn't process all these people by herself. Even if Charles were here, they would still have people waiting. But she had Tonya. A pretty black lady from this neighborhood, Tonya knew how to handle herself and others. That's why she was so good at her job. She wasn't afraid of more than one person coming in at a time. She could handle the rude ones, the impatient ones, and the sneaky ones. She got them through intake, and if she thought there was something really suspicious about a client, other than the usual working under the table, concealing a criminal record, or hiding minor drug deals, she would make reference to her fiancé, who was a cop, and how excited she was that he would be coming in any minute now to have a cup of coffee with her. The truth was, Tonya had been divorced from her retail district manager husband for 3 years, and didn't have a fiancé that was a cop, or even a fiancé for that matter. Though she was well under 30, Tonya said she was through with men. But she did legitimately know a couple of cops from the station 2 doors down, and her tone was so convincing that no real dangerous thug had ever called her bluff. It was amazing the way a truly shady character, after talking to Tonya, would suddenly get a cell phone call and have to come back at another time. Tonya prided herself in this art of bluffing and subtle intimidation while still being polite, and she knew it was the one reason Bobby and John would never even want to think about losing her as an employee. Jezebel was sure Tonya got paid very well, and she was sure that anyone who got by Tonya was not a violent scumbag, with the possible exceptions of Bobby and John themselves. It seemed to be getting worse every day. Each morning, shortly after the doors opened, potential clients filed in. The seats filled up fast, and often it was standing room only, with a wide array of people from every country represented in the microcosm that was the lobby of In a Pinch. And what they all had in common was a kind of poverty that relied on loans, these high-interest loans, supposed to provide a quick fix and a way out. "Tonya, is Sharon coming in today?" Jezebel asked, though she knew she wouldn't like the answer either way. "Yes, ma'am," Tonya replied. Great, thought Jezebel as she grabbed her papers from the printer. Just great. "Sharon, I'm so proud to be working in the financial industry, Stewart." Sharon wore a gray or navy blue suit every day, practical pumps, and a pressed white blouse. Jezebel couldn't tell if Sharon belonged on an airplane serving ginger ale or in Washington, D.C. serving papers. Sharon spoke clearly, enunciating every word as if articulation were a job qualification in this zoo. "What time is she due in?" Jezebel asked. "Another hour," Tonya answered. "Okay, please just tell people I'm alone until then and to hang on. It might be a while. They can get some coffee or come back in a couple of hours if they don't want to wait." "Okay," Tonya said. "Whatever works for you. I'll keep 'em at bay." Jezebel knew she would. Tonya was such a good person to work with, so strong and polite at the same time. Rare qualities in this industry. In fact, in any industry. She half wished Tonya had another job. Tonya could work anywhere and make good money. She didn't have to rely on Bobby and John. She could go out and do something meaningful. Jezebel wished she were in the same position. Back in her office, Jezebel saw the red-haired fan-fixing lady cleaning her globular glasses and pacing. "Okay, I just need a couple of signatures," Jezebel said, sitting down at her desk. She was thinking about Michael and the park again. "Stop it," she scolded herself. "Focus." The lady sat back down. "You know, your office is kind of stuffy," the lady said, taking a pen out of the pen holder on Jezebel's desk. "You could use a fan in here. You can—" Jezebel pointed to the places that required signatures. "Sign here and here," she interrupted. "Then I sign as a witness, and I can get you a copy for your records." "So, what do you think?" the lady asked. "About the fan, I mean." This lady is relentless, Jezebel thought, but she was used to clients trying to sell her things. After all, that's what a good salesperson did, and it put Jezebel a little at ease thinking the lady was ambitious and assertive. "I think the owners won't approve the expenditure," Jezebel said. "Well, what about for your house? You have a house, right? You need a fan for your house. I can get you a fan for your house." I have a good central AC system and a big fan. I'm all set. But thanks anyway," Jezebel said. Her voice was flatter than she meant it to be, but she needed to discourage the lady and still be gentle about it. Not that Sharon was ever gentle. Sharon was the stucco wall trying to pass herself off as 1970s velvet wallpaper. "Well, if you ever need a fan, you know how to get in touch with me," said the lady. "Just call me. I can sell you a good fan, a really good fan, or I can fix one up that broke, or I can—" Jezebel got up to make copies. "Excuse me," she said, going back to the lobby. The trip to the copy machine was always an excellent escape. When she returned to her office, the woman was pacing again. Thinking the lady must go through a lot of footwear this way, Jezebel handed her the copies, shook her clammy hand, and told her to have a nice day. The woman smiled briefly and said, "Okay, call me about that fan." "I will if I need to," said Jezebel. And the woman walked out of her office, breaking into a tuneless whistle, as if life had just given her something wonderful to look forward to. Jezebel wondered if fans made the woman happy. Was the woman happier than she was? Jezebel drummed her fingers on her desk, a relic from the 1970s, evolved from cheap wood and scratches. She couldn't remember how many times she had listened to the sound of her nails against that wood as she waited for another client to come in. The sound was that noticeable no matter how brief. Yes, that was her day and most of her life. Client after client. Then go home, feed the cat, talk to or see Michael, call her mother once a week. That was about it. She should have been further on by now, or at least she thought she should have. She really did need to do something. Needed more fresh air, maybe a walk outside when time permitted. If time ever did permit anything more. But time, like most other things in the world, wasn't very generous. She considered the onslaught of incoming clients, damning Charles again. He had not worked here that long, a month or two at max. Maybe he didn't really want to work here. But it wasn't her concern. She didn't want to work here either, but she had to, and she didn't want to be the only one processing applications, and she surely didn't want to have to play tag team with Sharon. Jezebel, I would like you to meet... Tonia's voice pinched Jezebel out of what was actually a 10-second reverie. Jezebel is going to take care of you from here, Tonia said. Have a seat, sir, Jezebel said. The client smelled expensive, freshly cologned. The black man in a gray pinstripe suit leaned awkwardly in the plastic chair. No one ever seemed comfortable in these chairs, which Bobby and John probably planned when they had chosen the chairs years ago. The man's polished shoes looked out of place next to Jezebel's beat-up desk. Honestly, she didn't know why some of them had to come here at all. She felt pretty poor next to them. But then, if anything, this job had taught her never to judge the client by the dress or the car or the cologne. Some of the best-dressed people were the poorest, most hard-working people who had legitimately fallen on hard times and only had their clothes left to show that they had ever done well in life. Or some were those who had over-borrowed and would always live on the edge of collections and repossession as a result. Still others shuffled in on canes, barely able to walk and afford their monthly medication costs, but looking stately somehow. Of course, there were the gamblers, the players, the drug users and dealers who owed their superiors money, the ones who never seemed to learn that a quick fix wasn't the answer, and neither was a life in the alleys and basements of the city. For some of them, this place had become a kind of financial addiction. They lived from loan to loan, like they did from game to game and fix to fix. She took the papers he handed her and asked the usual questions. You understand, she began. Yeah, I understand, the man cut her off. Just continue. Sorry, said Jezebel, glancing up at his face. I have to remind you of that legally. I know. Let's get on with it, he said. She wondered why he had to take the loan. It couldn't be good, whatever it was, judging from his reaction. She processed the rest in silence, only indicating when she had to get up to retrieve the prints for him to sign. He signed quickly in small, neat, cursive letters, J.F. Frank. She noticed his name because the writing was so sophisticated-looking, like him. She stared at her shoes. Flats. They weren't that old, but they weren't shiny like J.F. Frank's either. Better-off people would have tossed or donated shoes like hers. By the time J.F. Frank left, Jezebel needed coffee. Back to the lobby. Tonia always understood the whys of Jezebel's mini-breaks and never begrudged her. In a Pinch wasn't really a big place. Jezebel spent much of her day walking from her office to the lobby and then back, sometimes just to get a respite from the walls that were strong enough to strangle a person, but mostly to pick up documents from the printer or make copies. The tiny bathroom at the rear of the building gave a contemporary meaning to the term water closet and provided a little escape. It smelled like mold and bad breath, so she went only when absolutely necessary. Bobby and John had other priorities, bigger ones, but they would never waste those on the people or employees of In a Pinch. At least, that's what Jezebel assumed. She rarely had time to leave for lunch. Sometimes Tonia asked Jezebel to cover the front while she ran out to pick up some food for everyone. Good afternoon, ladies, and how are we today? Sharon asked as Jezebel stirred her coffee. Sharon had entered the room like it was a fashion runway. She didn't just walk in. She announced her presence in her smooth, articulate voice from a mouth that gave only the illusion of a smile. Jezebel didn't even pretend to smile back. Why pretend? She hated Sharon. Just fine, Tonia replied. Tonia wasn't all that crazy about Sharon either, but Tonia was more used to faking smiles from working in the front, and Jezebel knew Tonia wouldn't want to give Sharon the satisfaction of knowing they had struggled short-handed this morning. You have Mr. and Mrs. Guadalupe here waiting for you, Sharon. Sharon nodded, her hair staying in place from what must have been expensive spray. Sharon was an expensive woman. Jezebel pressed herself against the doorframe to get back into her office. She avoided brushing against Sharon, as if the woman had some kind of catching snob disease. Sharon made her exquisite exit, while Tonya made her confident one. Tonya brushed against Sharon on purpose, probably just to see if she could make Sharon flinch. Sharon prevailed, however. A minute later, Tonya was introducing the next client, an elderly man with generic-looking eyeglasses, a cane, and something stuck to his chin. Jezebel didn't want to stare to find out exactly what that something was. Maybe he had cut himself shaving. Maybe he had dripped something from his meager lunch. Stop it, Jezebel told herself. Stay focused. Well, I don't like doing this kind of thing, the man said as he handed Jezebel his paperwork. Seems just so expensive somehow. But I just got to this point. I kept failing behind, and then the missus, well, she needed those diabetes pills, and even with the Medicare, that put us behind. Gets harder and harder every day, seems like, he said. Jezebel nodded. She understood more than he knew she did. So I'm thinking if I take this little loan, I can have it paid off in 6 months or so. See, I have a couple of stocks. They aren't doing so good right now, but in a couple of months, things could change, and then we'll be all set. But right now... She entered his information, nodding at him as he continued. She wanted to be kind, so she softened her tone as she reminded him what sort of loan he was getting. He sat closer, his cane parked firmly in the tile floor of her office, his head tilted as he listened intently. I understand, miss, he said when she had finished. Like I said, this is just for the time being. The missus, she's diabetic and needs that medication. I have high blood pressure myself, and I stopped taking the medication. Last time I saw the doc, he read me the riot act, I tell you. So I'll take this here little loan and get some of that medication for the both of us. But don't you worry, I always pay all my bills. I am sure that you do, sir, Jezebel said. Let me go make some copies for you to sign. Jezebel could hear Sharon enunciating to her clients in the office across from the copier. And you know, it is my duty to remind you that this is indeed... Jezebel mouthed Sharon's speech, mimicking her, screwing up her face to the printer as she did so. Bitch, she said silently. God, that lady drove her nuts. Today she was wearing another navy suit. It looked like it was made of wool or something. Her shoes were spotless, and her blouse. Jezebel wondered how many of the same ones Sharon actually owned. She pictured a closet full of blue and gray suits, white blouses, and sensible, expensive new shoes. Barf. Here you are, sir, Jezebel said, returning to her own client. He got up, leaned on the cane, and took the copies. Well, I thank you, young lady. I'm sure I'll not see you again, so take good care of yourself. And you take care, too, Jezebel said. She felt like it was the most sincere thing she had said all day, and it struck her somehow as sad. The day passed along one interminable, bumpy road, client after client, listening to stories, saying the same things, wondering if it was time to leave, wondering if there were more to life, and thinking there had to be another way for these people to get money. But that would put her out of a job. She wondered if she should start counting how many clients she served, the way Tonya logged the number of clients coming through the front door. Disgusted, she realized she even had the same kinds of thoughts day in and day out. Nothing changed, ever. At 5 o'clock, Jezebel shut down her computer, mentally saying goodbye to her favorite photo of her and Michael in the park, put on her jacket, deposited the last bit of paperwork in Tonya's inbox to be filed, and walked toward the door. Is it time for you to leave already? Sharon called from her office. My, I just don't know how it gets to be this late. You are lucky to be leaving early, Sharon said. I get in at 8:30, Jezebel reminded her, immediately wanting to stifle herself. Why should she have to remind Sharon what hours she worked? Sharon wasn't her boss. It was none of her damn business. Just because Sharon worked the later shift didn't mean Jezebel was responsible for discussing their difference in schedules. Well, it must be good of you to come in that early. You don't have as many clients first thing in the morning, I suspect, as I do in the evenings, after they have all finished work for the day. That is when it starts to get very busy, Sharon said. Jezebel nodded. Sharon had said this before. Jezebel literally bit her tongue, struggling not to remind Sharon of all the elderly and poor lined up before the doors even opened, and that unemployed people could come any time they wanted, which was usually during the day. And when Tonya leaves so early, Sharon continued. Why was she doing this? Tonya didn't leave early at all. Tonya came in the same time Jezebel did. What the hell did Sharon care? Are you worried about being here alone? Jezebel asked, not out of concern, but with the intention to pepper Sharon with a little worry. Oh no, Sharon said. The security system is in place, and the police are so conveniently close. Which is why Tonya used the police as a convenient way to deter violent criminals from requesting services. In a pinch sat on the corner of Gorham and Essex, with the Northern Police Station less than a block to the left of them. Cops passed by their windows all the time, stopping in the cafe across the street, now and then holding up traffic to let a pedestrian cross. Tonya had an easy job of waving cheerfully through the front window and beckoning to the police to play fiancé whenever she needed it. And the cops, who shut their eyes to the nature of in a pinch's business, were happy to play the part. Still, Sharon would not be so lucky. Who would want to even pretend to be Sharon's fiancé? If traffic counted towards stats, the city was pretty busy, but it didn't offer as many jobs as people needed. It didn't even have as many stores as it used to. Houses had started to look more world-weary. Streets and sidewalks had potholed pavement, and the lawsuits against the city had soared. And the way the recession was working lately, it didn't look like it would be getting better any sooner. Jezebel was smart enough to know that a bad economy and high poverty rates secured her a job, but she was also smart enough not to question that too much. She didn't need to be feeling guilty about how she made her own ends barely meet, especially when she didn't feel like she had much of a choice. Well, you go on now, said Sharon. I would not want to be the reason you had to leave late. Jezebel pushed the door open, feeling the cold against the palm of her hand. Her feet hurt. Her shoes never felt right at the end of the day, like her feet had swelled through the hours she sat at the desk. The walk to the bus stop would not be pleasant today. It was March, and March was still a little more than chilly. The wind had died down, leaving the memory of cold, as the dull orange sun dissolved behind the early evening clouds. This kind of chill usually deterred her from taking a walk or doing anything requiring extended time in the mean outside, eager to inflict a head cold. At her apartment, Jezebel had wanted to turn the heat off and just use her electric blanket at night. So far, that was just a want. The cold one. She didn't want to test fate and get herself sick. While she had some sick time, she didn't have enough to cover, say, the flu. And besides, the owners of In a Pinch frowned on employees taking sick time even when it was necessary. Not that Charles seemed to care. Cheap bastards, Jezebel thought. They were the kind of owners who pretended they treated their employees well, throwing little Christmas parties in the lobby, giving out cards and boxes of Whitman's chocolates for Valentine's Day. But when it came down to it, Bobby and John Spellini could care less about their employees or clients. They cared about profit. They wore Armani suits into Dunkin' Donuts. All the old men drinking coffee and reading the newspapers would put down their cups, stop, and stare. It was hard to tell if the stares were generated from awe or disgust, but either way, the Spellinis got the attention they were looking for from the people they wanted to attract. There were some people, like police detectives, the Spellinis did not want to attract, and they usually didn't. Local cops couldn't really touch them, nor did most of the cops have any desire to. After one or two failed attempts to nail the Spellinis, the chief had called a kind of truce, so long as the clients were peaceful and laws were seemingly followed. Bobby drove a 1968 fully restored flaming red Corvette. John drove a new black BMW. They both wore wedding bands, and in their wallets kept pictures of their perfectly manicured wives. Jezebel knew both men regularly cheated on those perfectly manicured wives. She did her best to avoid or ignore the owners whenever they happened to visit, and she certainly averted her eyes at the obvious mistress who sometimes came in with their lecherous lovers. At least those lovers didn't try to slum it with the employees or clients. The thing that set Bobby and John, and Jezebel always alphabetized their names for some reason, apart from other thugs, was that they gave to charities. Not a lot of money, but enough to make them look like good church-going folks. They attended Catholic Mass every Sunday, sat in one of the first few pews, and bowed their heads when the priest prompted the congregation in the act of contrition. They even went to confession every Friday. Were they confirmed in the church, Jezebel wondered? Who would confirm these guys? Who would serve Holy Communion to Bobby and John, when the more traditional priests would deny communion to anyone they knew had openly committed a mortal sin? Enough about Bobby and John, Jezebel thought. Leave them at work or in whatever dark alley they inhabited after hours. She was the only one at the bus stop, and for that she was thankful. Wisps of her blonde hair blew in ribbons across her eye, and she shook her head, irritated, looking for the bus and wanting it to show soon. She had a car, but it had a bad habit of breaking down. And besides, at work there was nowhere to park except in the street, and the last thing she needed was to have her 10-year-old coupe hit or towed or stolen. She didn't want to have to fight her clients for parking either. It didn't seem right somehow, and the effort would not be worth it. Might just as well take the bus and help the planet. The bus finally trembled into sight, squeaking Jezebel's thoughts out of her mind, veering towards the sidewalk, the door opening to reveal several empty seats. Thank God, she wasn't into hanging from the bus poles like a monkey the way she used to as a kid. It had been fun then, but it wasn't now. She didn't remember being this tired as a child. Life was new back then, like the stuffed kitty she had received on her 7th birthday, the kitty she still kept on her pillow. Her own kitty loved to snuggle with the fake. She clinked some tokens into the old-style metal collection box and headed back to the last empty seat she could find. The vibration of the bus, the feel of the wheels, the squeak of the shocks as it moved on the road, making turns, slowing, stopping, letting on other passengers, letting some off, soothed her in a strange way once she had settled comfortably into her seat. It was a time when she could let go, let someone else do the driving, let someone else be in charge, make the decisions and collect tokens. For 20 minutes she could look out a window and think about nothing, the landscape of the city streaming by in a colorful band of buildings and cars and people and streetlights, brightening against the dimming day. The stop was less than a minute away from her apartment, a basement unit 3 doors down from the laundry room. It was an okay place, she thought, turning the key in the hollow wooden door. It wasn't a big complex, fairly quiet. There weren't many break-ins, so the cheap door and almost useless doorknob lock rarely worried her. And besides, Michael was around some of the time, so it wasn't like she was totally alone. She knew he couldn't be there tonight, though, because it was Monday, and he liked to watch football at his place with his buddy on Monday. Tony was Michael's closest friend, in and out of work, and she guessed Monday was something Tony looked forward to as much as Michael did. A buff-looking Italian guy with an easy smile, Tony had a sweet, pretty, dark-haired girlfriend named Jen, someone Jezebel liked but didn't know much. The two couples got together once in a while, but usually it was like tonight, boys' night. Just as well. Jezebel wanted the night to herself, wanted to absently read a cheap novel and turn in early with her 2 cats, the real one and the stuffed one. Tarika greeted her at the door, rubbing herself against Jezebel's leg, exhaling a meow that made Jezebel feel guilty about having only one real cat. Truthfully, she thought about getting another one to keep this long-haired, black and orange striped furball company during the day, but Michael had already complained about Tarika, and if they ever did move in together, like they talked about, the cat thing would become an issue. Jezebel wouldn't want to give up Tarika, but she didn't know if she would if she were given the tough decision to make. She and Tarika had been together for 5 years, she and Michael for 3. Never mind, don't think about it, she told herself, scratching Tarika behind the ears. Hi, baby girl, she said. You hungry? Tarika purred steady as a wind-up clock and headed to her food bowl. If anything, Tarika loved to eat, and Jezebel loved to listen to Tarika's purrs. Jezebel looked at the answering machine. Nothing blinking. No messages slipped under the door, not even an ad. She was too tired to check regular mail and email, probably junk and spam anyway, so she opened a can of diet soda and flopped on her couch, watching Tarika dive headfirst into the bowl of fishy-smelling kitty chow. The purring and grunting reminded Jezebel of a pig eating from a trough. She laughed silently. Maybe she would rename Tarika Gip, pig spelled backwards. Boy, she was getting more than just a little pathetic, sitting here with her cat, laughing at her own jokes. There simply had to be more than this, no matter how much she loved her cat. When would she get more out of her job, out of her life, even out of her relationship? Again, she squelched her thoughts. Be happy with what you have, because you could have less than your clients, she reminded herself. Huh? She said. Who? Michael? Jezebel mumbled into the phone. What time is it? What are you doing? Well, I just thought you needed a call, baby, he said into her ear. She scrubbed at her eyes with sleepy fingers. What time was it? What, don't you want to hear from me? Don't you miss me? Yeah, I miss you, Michael, she said, finally waking up enough to comprehend. What are you doing? Finishing up with my buds here. You working tomorrow? Not me, baby. Ground still froze where we need to be tomorrow. Michael worked construction off and on. Sometimes he worked with Tony, but not always. Tony had a second job, telemarketing, to subsidize during the winter. Jezebel wished Michael would do the same, but he most likely wouldn't be very good at it with his brusque manner. When the work was there, Michael made good money, but it was inconsistent, and he wasn't very good at saving. There were times when Michael couldn't pay his own rent, and Jezebel gave him an advance that always seemed to turn into a permanent loan. She didn't have Bobby and John as collections backup, and she wouldn't want it anyway, considering her feelings for Michael. Inconvenient, she thought, because it put her on an even tighter budget. So I got to party hardy tonight. Where'd you get the money to party? She murmured, her eyes scanning for the clock. It was 2:15 in the morning. What's it to you, huh? He asked. Then he chuckled. Come on now. You know I have to have my Mondays. Yeah, I know. Listen, Michael, I have to get some sleep. I have work in the morning. Oh, you saying that to make me feel bad? His tone changed. He could go hot to cold pretty quickly when he drank too much, but she was used to it. When he was just buzzed, he was friendly and lovable as Tarika. When he got drunk, he could be all-out mean. No, hun, I'm just tired is all, she said. Okay. She hoped it would pacify him. Sometimes when he got like this, he didn't want to hang up. He wanted to argue. He wanted to goad her. She would fall for it occasionally, but not tonight in spite of her crappy day, one that would have made most people take the bait. Once when he was like this, she tried to hang up on him, but he came over to her apartment and banged on the door until she opened it. She didn't want to think about that night again, or she wouldn't get any sleep. Okay, she said again. How about tomorrow night you come over and I'll cook us a nice pot roast. I'll use the crock pot like you like it. Sound good? He paused. Yeah, whatever. Okay, he said, and he hung up. She inhaled, pulled the covers up to her ears, and rolled over. Tarika purred against the back of her legs, and Jezebel was thankful for the fur and purr. End of Chapter 1 of Approaching Felonias Park by Catherine Mercurio Gotthard. This sample recording was produced and narrated by Michael F. Mercurio. For more information, please visit approachingfeloniaspark.wordpress.com.